Well, hey, everybody. Under the glare of the Phoenix sun today, jury selection was completed in the Lori Daybell murder trial that's coming up. Vallow, infamously dubbed the Doomsday Cult Mom, is already serving a life sentence in Idaho. She's now stationed in Arizona for this trial, but that's for the murder of her two children, along with conspiring to kill her soon to be husband and co defendant, Chad Daybell's wife, Tammy. But now, this convicted killer faces Arizona charges in the death of her fourth husband, Charles Vallow. She's representing herself in court with standby counsel on hand, and Vallow has turned this normally tedious jury selection into part of the drama. The judge, Justin Beresky, optim- the judge, Justin Beresky, optimistically aimed to have that full jury seated by the end of this week, and he did it. So they'll be starting opening statements on April 7th. But outside of the juror questionnaires and peremptory strikes, Vallow had been plotting on a different front, plotting about who gets to watch her trial from the gallery. Well, hey, everybody, thanks for tuning in to Profiling Evil. Take a moment, hit that like and subscribe button, ring the bell, share us with your friends. Please do all that. Give us a thumbs up. It really helps us with our algorithms, and it helps us keep pushing out good content. Now, my previous video was about a move that Daybell had made to try to keep Nate Eaton, that East Idaho News journalist, from appearing in the courtroom by placing him on the witness list. He is a reporter who has doggedly covered every twist and corner in the Vallow saga from East Idaho News. The gambit was as brazen as it was transparent, and by naming Eaton as a potential witness, Vallow could have invoked the rule of sequestration that would have barred him from sitting in the courtroom to report on the trial. Now, in a previous video, I reported that failed, and I actually had some video from Nate today as he talked about that outside of the courtroom. But if you'll remember, in that open courtroom, Vallow actually laughed at the defense motion, challenging her tactic as claiming she didn't realize that it would exclude Nate. Well, her stated rationale was that she believed that Eaton could help her impeach witnesses who might have different testimony in court compared to when Nate Eaton had talked to them over the last several years in news reports. All of that failed, though, because the judge, I think, pretty swiftly saw through the ploy. So during that pretrial hearing yesterday, Judge Beresky reminded Vallow she didn't need Eaton on the stand to accomplish her goal, that she could just simply put up the articles or the video showing and impeaching that particular witness. There was really no legitimate reason to compel the reporter's live testimony because she could introduce that material information herself. And Judge Beresky struck Eaton from the witness list, and now he's able to go into the courtroom. But this brings up a really interesting question that I wanted to make this video about. Because if Eaton had been deemed a witness, he would have been unable to observe any of the trial testimony, gutting his ability to cover one of the biggest trials of the year. But for Lori Vallow, this early skirmish was a warning shot, in my opinion. Some courtroom gamemanship, and she learned a lesson that is not going to be tolerated, especially when it collides with constitutional freedoms. But it also set an interesting precedent in real time, a precedent that's being watched by others far beyond the state of Arizona. As this trial now moves forward with opening statements on Monday, April 7th, Vallow will have to battle the evidence against her without muzzling the press in the room or on the sidelines. And on the sidelines, other figures that are entangled in high profile cases are taking notice, in my opinion, because I want to jump clear across the United States to Massachusetts and the Karen Reed retrial that's going on. Because if Vallow's trial is a spectacle under the desert sun, The case of Karen Reed is a powder keg in chilly New England. You see, Reed, this 45-year-old Massachusetts woman and former professor, is facing her second trial for the alleged murder of her boyfriend, Boston police officer John O'Keefe. The
bailiwick
first
that may
trial,
in
as you
fact happen. We
remember,
may get
ended
the
in a
death
hung
penalty.
jury last
And
July,
frankly, there is
leaving the
an
truth
incredible amount of
unresolved and
evidence,
both
if
sides
it's all
more
accurate,
determined than
that would
ever
point that
to
this
get
was
a win.
premeditated, that there
Well,
was
now, as
fantasy
jury
involved, there
selection
was
begins anew in
pre-planning
Norfolk
involved.
Superior
There was
Court,
exploring other
it's clear
serial
that
predators
picking an
like the
impartial
Unabomber,
jury this time
and that
around
there
is going
was
to
a
be an
personal
uphill
manifesto
battle.
that says, I'm going
The
to do
case has
this.
become a
All of that
local
supports the
obsession
idea
and a
of a death
national
penalty
curiosity,
case under the
with
federal
feverish
system.
media
The interesting thing is
opinions
going to
and
be how New
coverage
Yorkers are going to
that
take that.
fiercely
Yeah, he
has
faces numerous
divided the
state and federal
public.
charges,
In
including
fact,
murder in
when
the
Judge
first degree
Beverly
and
Cannoni
furtherance
asked
of
the
an act
first
of
pool of
terrorism.
jurors,
He's pleaded
hey,
not
have you
guilty
ever
to state
heard or
charges, but has
talked
not yet
about this
entered a plea for
case?
federal charges. We'll be
Almost
watching more
every
of that.
hand went
Great to have you
up.
on today, Mike. Thank
Out
you
of
for your time.
92 prospective
You.
All right.
jurors, 78 admitted to having some familiarity with Reed's sprawling legal saga. And 40 of those people said they already had formed an opinion about whether she was guilty or innocent. Now, that's a stark illustration of how intense this case is getting, how intense it's been on talk radio, social media, and the nightly news reports. Selecting a truly blank slate jury might be impossible. The goal instead now, I think, is to just find people who, despite what they've heard, can still be fair and impartial. As one defense attorney recently quipped, you can't find a jury that doesn't know anything about the Karen Reed case. There's just been too much media. You're going to get people who know something. The question is, how much do they know? Well, that media saturation is no accident either. The Karen Reed case has all the ingredients of a true crime thriller that the press and the public can't resist. Prosecutors are claiming that Reed got drunk and, in a tragic blur of events, struck Officer O'Keefe with her SUV, leaving him to die in the snow outside of a colleague's house. Now, her defense, on the other hand, spins a much different story, one that sounds more like a conspiracy novel. They argue that O'Keefe was attacked inside the house by people that he trusted, and that Karen Reed was just a convenient outsider framed by a cover up involving law enforcement and friends of the victim, and frankly, the hospital staff and everyone else. To Karen Reed's supporters, she's an innocent woman ensnared in a web of corruption. To her detractors, though, she's a cop killer trying to blame everybody but herself. These polarized narratives only grew louder after the hung jury last year. So now, with this do-over trial on the deck, both the prosecution and the defense are scrutinizing potential jurors with even more intensity, mindful that the last panel couldn't reach a verdict, and they're determined to seat 16 people who will. Well, by the end of the first day of jury selection, only two jurors had been seated, and Judge Cannoni acknowledged the sluggish pace of this progress. It could take days, if not weeks, to find 12 citizens and those four alternates that are acceptable to both sides of this equation. Every question during voir dire is calibrated to weed out bias. Questions like, what have you heard about the case? Do you trust the police? Have you ever blogged or posted about Karen Reed? You know, in a trial where everybody has an opinion, the lawyers are desperately hunting for those rare unicorn jurors who haven't already made up their mind, or at least believe they can set aside what they've heard at the barber shop or on Facebook and make a true decision. The atmosphere around the courthouse is charged. This trial isn't just local news items, it's bleeding into the national dialogue. In fact, Fox News has been talking about it, and I joined them today to talk a little more about the case, and I'm going to share that in a few moments. I commented on how the highest stakes in criminal cases can influence tactics and narratives. And we talked about an unrelated New York City case, that of Luigi Mangione, where the U.S. Attorney General just directed federal prosecutors to seek the death penalty against him, accusing him of murdering healthcare CEO Brian Thompson. A reminder that when life hangs in the balance, whether the defendants or the victims, the pressure on all parties ramps up. Now, we're going to watch that video in a couple of minutes when I wrap up a few more things to talk about. But it's in this context that an unusual figure has emerged in the Karen Reed case. Aidan Kearney, better known by his online name of Turtle Boy, is a controversial digital journalist and a blogger who's taken up Reed's cause with evangelical fervor. Through his Turtle Boy media platform, he's published exposés, floated alternative theories about O'Keefe's death, and relentlessly accused certain police officers and witnesses of covering up the truth. To some, he's a champion of a wrongfully accused woman. To others, he's a provocateur, fanning the flames of conspiracy. But what's undeniable is that Kearney has become so deeply entangled in the case, so much so now that he's part of the court proceedings in ways that a typical reporter usually isn't. Prosecutors are alleging that Kearney didn't just report on the case, they say he inserted himself into it. So, in a bombshell development a little earlier this year, a newly unsealed affidavit revealed that Karen Reed had been in close contact with Kearney throughout the first trial, leaking to him non public information, including details about witnesses, autopsy information, and even personal information about the case or witnesses. Now, investigators suspect that this was part of a coordinated effort to intimidate or discredit witnesses via Kearney's blog posts. In fact, the court approved a search warrant to go into Reed's cell phone on the theory that she and Kearney had been conspiring to interfere with witnesses. Kearney himself, he's under investigation for witness intimidation in connection with this case. And all of this means that, unlike Nate Eaton, who was an objective observer reporting facts, Aidan Kearney actually finds himself portrayed as a potential actor in the case events. And that makes him a different kind of witness than I believe Nate Eaton is. So, given these twists, one can't help but ask, is Turtle Boy, the blogger, listed as a witness to keep him from talking? And if so, will he demand the same kind of treatment that Nate Eaton just got? Kearney has been outspoken about his First Amendment rights to cover the trial and express his viewpoints. But if the prosecution in Massachusetts believes he crossed the line from reporter to participant, they may have everything they need to do what Lori Vallow was trying to do: call him as a witness and effectively keep him from the courtroom until his testimony. Kearney would then face a dilemma that tests the balance between the freedom of the press and the integrity of the trial. Does a blogger advocate deserve the same protections as a traditional journalist? His supporters would argue yes, that Kearney, like Eaton, should not be sidelined simply for doing aggressive reporting, and that any attempt to do so is a ploy to silence a critical voice. Now, they could point to Judge Boreski's ruling in Arizona yesterday. What they could do is point to Judge Boreski's ruling in Arizona for support. A court acknowledging that journalists have a right to be present and that their published materials, not their person, should be used if their content is relevant. Kearney might try to quash a subpoena or that witness listing by invoking Massachusetts reporter shield law and the broader principle that reporters shouldn't be forced into witness chairs. Now, again, I don't know that law very well, but I think that's what it means. After all, Arizona's shield law helped keep Eaton off the stand, and many states have similarly protected journalists to encourage free news gathering. But on the other hand, If prosecutors convince the judge that Kearney actively participated in witness intimidation, the equation changes. Shield laws typically don't protect someone who is an alleged perpetrator of a crime, rather than just a disinterested journalist. So Kearney's situation sits in a gray area that's primed for courtroom fireworks. It's entirely possible that we'll see some kind of a showdown over whether Turtle Boy can stay in the gallery or be dragged to the witness stand. The judge in Reed's case is going to have to weigh the evidence of Kearney's involvement against the principle of a public trial. And whichever way that decision goes, it's going to carry high drama. I mean, imagine the scene. A crusading blogger being escorted out of the courtroom, or alternatively, a frustrated prosecutor being forced to watch him socializing the case from the back row. The First Amendment versus trial strategy. It's a collision course, and Karen Reed's retrial may well be where it happens. And you know, it might seem counterintuitive. I mean, why would any defendant or prosecutor want to put a reporter on their witness list if the job is merely to observe and report? Yet, as these cases illustrate, there are strategic reasons why someone might try this gambit. Now, here are the main motives behind including a journalist on a witness list, as far as I'm concerned. Number one, it's to bar them from the courtroom. By simply naming the reporter as a potential witness, a party could invoke the rule of sequestration and exclude the reporter from observing the trial. Court rules generally would forbid witnesses from hearing other testimonies, so the journalists would be forced to stay out until and unless they testify. Usually, after they testify, they're allowed to come back into the courtroom. In Lori Vallow's case, this was the first and most obvious effect. Had Nate Eaton remained on that witness list, he would have been precluded from watching any of the proceedings and unable to cover them until he testified. For a high profile trial, removing a keen set of eyes and live news updates from the courtroom could significantly dampen real time coverage. Now, number two, an idea that it would disrupt or intimidate the reporter's coverage. Because including a journalist on a witness list, in my opinion, could serve as a form of legal intimidation. It sends a message that maybe says, hey, you keep digging and you might find yourself dragged into court, forced to testify, or even accused of bias. At a minimum, I think it disrupts the journalist's work. They now have to hire lawyers, file motions, and worry about their own legal exposure instead of focusing on the trial. Nate Eaton had to take the time to fight the motion against him rather than simply report. Aidan Kearney, also facing such a move, would surely be tied up in defending his right to be present instead of churning out daily stories, whether you like them or not. The tactic can be especially chilling if the journalist has sources to protect or unpublished notes. The specter of a subpoena might make them think twice about aggressively covering the trial. Eaton plainly suggested that Vallow's move was intended to keep him out and prevent his reporting. And if it had been successful, it would have forced him into the defensive. Now, number three, to control the public narrative. That's the third reason. High profile trials are tried in two courts, one in the law and one in public opinion. A savvy defendant or prosecutor knows that whoever controls the story outside of the courthouse can matter. A persistent journalist can shape public perception through their reporting. So when you sideline a particularly influential reporter, a party might hope to limit negative press or skew the tone of the coverage. In Karen Reed's saga, for example, Aidan Kearney's blogging has rallied a segment of the public to her side, painting the prosecution in a harsh light. It's not hard to imagine why the prosecution might want him silenced or discredited. But conversely, If a journalist has been digging up facts that hurt the defense's narrative, as Eaton did with his long years of coverage in the Vallow case, the defense might try to bench that player. Removing or disqualifying a key media figure can blunt the momentum of the story. In short, it's an attempt to manage what information leaks out to the public, or at least delay it until after the verdict. It's a cynical form of spin control. If you can't stop the presses, you can try to eject the press from the building. Now, these reasons may explain the temptation to weaponize witness lists, but they also highlight that the strategy is widely seen as lacking in integrity. Manipulating courtroom rules to sideline a journalist doesn't exactly scream confidence in a person's case. It can look like an act of desperation or an attempt to hide something. Trials are meant to be public showcases of evidence and truth seeking. Shutting out a reporter undermines that openness. As East Idaho News noted in their response to Vallow's maneuver, they had serious concerns about the constitutionality of putting a reporter on the stand. Such a move would have clashed with well established First Amendment protections and with many states' shield laws that prevents journalists from being forced into court without compelling reasons. Now, if the only purpose is to dissuade coverage or inconvenience the media, judges are rightfully wary. It offends the spirit of a free press, and the public's right to know what happens in the courtroom is paramount. There's also practical ethical lines because while lawyers must advocate zealously for their clients, calling a reporter as a witness purely to freeze them out of the courtroom smacks of bad faith. It doesn't contribute to finding the truth. In fact, it withholds information from the public. And when such tactics arise, they pit the Sixth Amendment against the First Amendment, the defendant's right to mount a defense versus the press's right and the public's right to an open trial. Judges have often refereed this clash. In Arizona, Judge Boreski struck the balance by ruling that the request was unnecessary. That in that case, a journalist shouldn't be excluded, and their published work would be enough to impeach someone if it did, in fact, impeach them. It was a nod to both the fairness and common sense. And likewise, in Massachusetts, any judge faced with the Turtle Boy conundrum will have to ask, is this person listed as a witness for a genuine evidentiary purpose or just to bully the press? If it's the latter, a good judge isn't going to indulge it. Ultimately, these courtroom maneuvers and this extra layer of drama to an already dramatic trial make for interesting talk. They remind us that in high profile cases, the fight isn't just between the prosecution and the defense. It's also about controlling the narrative inside and outside of the courtroom. Lori Vallow Daybell tried to tighten that control by booting a reporter, only to have the court reaffirm that even an accused murderer doesn't get to handpick who watches her trial. Now, in the Karen Reed case, the narrative tug-of-war is even more intense, with a blogger turned character in the story testing how far press freedom can go when a journalist steps on toes. Well, as we follow these trials, the stakes for the defendants are as high as they come: freedom or life in prison, and in some cases, as commentators have noted, potentially even the death penalty. But the stakes for the First Amendment are also significant. Will courts allow a clever stratagem to chip away at the openness of the judicial proceedings? Or are they going to hold the line, ensuring the public trials remain truly public and that journalists cannot be sidelined for doing their jobs? Now, there are times when I just think, oh, I wish that journalist wasn't there. And I have to remind myself that I'm so glad they are because they oftentimes force transparency. True crime fans know that every trial has subplots. In these cases, the subplot may have become the plot, because the battle over the witness list itself is a mini trial of our own values. In the end, the jury's going to decide the fate of Lori Vallow Daybell and Karen Reed, and eventually Luigi Mangione. Yet, through each objection and motion about witness lists and media tweets, the courts are deciding something larger. How much strategic gamemanship is too much, and whether our commitment to a free press can withstand the pressure cooker of a sensational trial. It is a delicate dance between justice and transparency. And as these real-life courtroom thrillers show, sometimes the most pivotal face-off isn't between the prosecutor and the defense attorney, but between the defendant's ploy and the very principles that underlie our judicial system. So stick around if you'd like to see my comments on Fox News today about the Karen Reed and Luigi Mangione cases.
Her second murder trial of Karen Reed. Reed has again pleaded not guilty to killing her police officer boyfriend and claims she is being framed. This case has captivated and sharply divided the nation, which could make jury selection a lengthy process. Let's bring in retired police commander Mike King. Thank you, sir, for joining us. Here is Judge Beverly making the case that this could take a while. Listen.
As you can imagine, this case is expected to take a while. The lawyers tell me that once we get a jury, which may also take a while, once we get a jury, that it's estimated that the evidence in this case should take 6 to 8 weeks. We do our best to let you know in advance what we anticipate the length of trial will be.
All right, so, Mike, the stats from the first trial, 9 weeks that trial took, 5 days of deliberations, 74 witnesses testified, 650 pieces of evidence involved. What do you expect from this trial?
Boy, I think this one is really going to light up. I think we're going to see a doubling of effort. I mean, we already know that they're asking for as many as 150 witnesses in this case, so double. The jury selection alone, they're bringing in 275 people per day just to try to find a jury that isn't somehow swayed one way or another or has indication or an understanding of this case. That alone could probably take a month just to get through jury selection. And then when this thing launches, it's a defense and a prosecution, 2 teams of lawyers that already have been down this trail once. They know what works with the jury, what didn't work as well with the jury. And I think you got a judge who's probably run out of a lot of patience with some of the shenanigans that went on inside of the courtroom and outside.
Wow. As we mentioned, this has captivated the nation. It has divided so many. We've been following the people who show up outside the courthouse, protesting that this is happening to her, that she's being framed. It's incredible to see. This is Dr. Laura Petler, the true crime forensic criminologist. What she says is the prosecution's possible pitfalls. This was earlier today.
When you muddy the water, the jury gets confused. And so to give the context of the physical evidence, you have to use the behavioral evidence. And that's what I feel in part was missing from the first trial, and why some jurors could not understand why Karen Reed would have wanted to kill her boyfriend.
You agree with that, or what exactly are you watching for here?
Yes, I really like Laura and appreciate her comment there. The thing that I think is important is that this jury really needs to hear the elements of the crime, the things that make this a crime, and try to avoid all of the noise with this thing. Some of it really disturbing noise about behaviors of law enforcement or others, but it boils down to the fact, did Karen Reed violate the law? Did she, in fact, back in and kill her boyfriend? And I think the evidence is pretty strong in that regard if they can keep all the noise away. But we have a community and, frankly, the potential of jurors on there that have no faith in the criminal justice system. And that's really frightening from my perspective of whether this can end up being a truly fair trial, not just for Karen Reed, but for the state.
Mike, I want to finish up by asking you about Luigi Mangione, another case that has captivated the nation after he was accused of killing in broad daylight right here in New York City, the United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson. Pam Bondi says that he should get the death penalty. In a statement, she says Luigi Mangione's murder of Brian Thompson, an innocent man and father of 2 young children, was a premeditated, cold-blooded assassination that shocked America. After careful consideration, I've directed federal prosecutors to seek the death penalty in this case as we carry out President Trump's agenda to stop violent crime and make America safe again. You think that's going to happen? Where does this go?
Well, clearly, with this falling into the federal bailiwick, that may in fact happen. We may get the death penalty. And frankly, there is an incredible amount of evidence, if it's all accurate, that would point that this was premeditated, that there was fantasy involved, there was pre-planning involved. There was exploring other serial predators like the Unabomber, and that there was a personal manifesto that says, I'm going to do this. All of that supports the idea of a death penalty case under the federal system. The interesting thing is going to be how New Yorkers are going to take that.
Yeah, he faces numerous state and federal charges, including murder in the first degree and furtherance of an act of terrorism. He's pleaded not guilty to state charges, but has not yet entered a plea for federal charges. We'll be watching all of that. Great to have you on today, Mike. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
All right.
Well, thanks for spending some time with us here at Profiling Evil. I'd like to know what you think about witness lists being used to block journalists from the courtroom. I hope you'll put your comments down below and that you'll weigh in on each other's comments. I mean, really, should digital reporters like Turtle Boy get the same protections as mainstream media like Nate Eaton? Let me know your comments, and again, put them down below. And let's keep this thing kind and constructive. There are so many emotions between the Karen Reed camp and the law enforcement camp and anyone who tries to speak in the middle. I've seen your mean letters. I've seen your mean notes. Let's just try to be constructive as we work through this, and hopefully you can join me in trusting the criminal justice system. Hey, be sure to follow Profiling Evil on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter for updates, behind-the-scene insights, and more conversations like this one. And if you want to dive deeper, head over to profilingevil.com to check out our BOLO, our story maps, our missing persons map. And while you're there, grab a copy of one of my true crime books. Hey, thanks so much for being a part of this journey. We'll see you soon at the next crime scene.